Ladies and gentlemen, please be informed that a running coffee is provided at the foyer. Please feel free to have a cup of coffee while listening to our last session today, Reinforcing Enablers for Growth and Development. This session will discuss on reinforcing the 4 policy enablers of the 12th plan. It will focus on enhancing skills of future talent, accelerating digital inclusion, promoting public transport, and strengthening governance.
To drive this session, we would like to invite Yang Berusaha Dr. Sumitra Nair, Vice Senior President, Strategic and Policy, Malaysia Digital Economic Corporation, MDEC, and the panelists, Yang Berusaha Dr. Ronald Mutasa, Human Development Practice Leader from Brunei, Malaysia, Philippines, and Thailand, World Bank, Yang Berusaha Dr. Rachel Gong, Deputy Director of Research, Khazanah Research Institute, Yang Berusaha Professor Insinyur Dr. 𝘓𝘬𝘪𝘠𝘠, Professor Universiti Tunku Abdul Rahman, and Yang Berbahagia Datuk Dr. Anis Yusal Yusof, Principal Research Fellow, Institute of Ethnic Studies, Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia. And ladies and gentlemen, without any further delay, Dr. Sumitra Nair, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Selamat petang dan salam sejahtera kepada semua. Terima kasih kepada Tuan Pengacara Majlis di atas pengenalan tadi. A very good afternoon to all the distinguished guests that are still here for the final session. I was part of the last session. It was highly engaging and very interesting, and we hope to do the same to keep you engaged, and hopefully we can have as much interaction as possible in this session. So this is session 4, and this is the session where we will talk about the 4 key policy enablers under the 12th Malaysia Plan, and these are policy enablers are consisting of enhancing skills, so we'll talk about that, accelerating digital inclusion, promoting public transport, and last but not least, strengthening governance. So to do this, I have a very distinguished panel today with me, and if I can just introduce them. So on my right is Dr. Ronald Mutasa, who is the Human Development Practice Leader for Brunei, Malaysia, Philippines, and Thailand with World Bank, right? So welcome, Dr. Mutasa. And then on my left, I have Dr. Rachel Gong, who is the Deputy Director for Research at Khazanah Research Institute. And on my left is Professor Dr. 𝘓𝘬𝘪𝘠𝘠, a professor with Universiti Tunku Abdul Rahman. And last but not least, on the extreme left is Yang Bahagia Datuk Dr. Anis Yusal Yusof, who is a fellow penyelidik utama or research fellow at the Institute for Ethnic Studies at UKM. Yeah. So thank you very much to the esteemed panelists, and I believe we have a very, very tight schedule. So I won't belabor on the context. I think it's very clear, and having listened to the sessions before this, I'm sure you're all very eager to listen to how the policy enabling part will come into the planning for RMK 12. So without further ado, if I can invite Dr. Ronald Mutasa to start off by talking about enhancing skills towards a more competitive workforce and economy. So Dr. Mutasa, please take the stage. Thank you.
Thank you for this introduction. So this morning, the Honorable Minister spoke about the need for Malaysia to shift away from traditional drivers of growth. Later in the session, we also heard from Dr. Norma, as well as from Dr. Jayanti, about the need to rethink the face of innovation in Malaysia. So they were right, and here is why. So as we all know, Malaysia, just like many other countries across the world, is going through mega trends that are basically affecting various other countries, particularly in terms of stiff competition, digitalization, as well as several other transitions that are basically calling for a rethink of how do you navigate, I think, this current phase of development, but more importantly, the next phase of development. And we also know that it's not only Malaysia that is basically navigating these mega trends. Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia, and Vietnam are equally also repositioning themselves to navigate exactly the same challenges. So in that context, it is very, very critical that we really rethink the face of innovation for Malaysia, particularly looking at the human capital or the human skills that the country possesses. As we have seen, some of the countries in the region that have positioned themselves very well, such as Singapore, have been able to take advantage of some of these rapidly shifting megatrends across the world, and really have been able to harness some of the foreign direct investments in order to enhance, of course, their competitiveness, grow the jobs, and also grow their economies. So I think a key question as we went through the agenda today, maybe a key question for many of you was basically, what does it mean for Malaysia's workforce and firms as we go forward? So we know that, of course, the world is going through rapid changes, and there are several other things that are shifting. But there's one thing that I think we all need to be aware of, which is that in terms of the skills in Malaysia, that has not been changing. So we really need to think about how do we really ensure that we reposition Malaysia by really looking at the skills agenda in order to reposition the country going forward, particularly, of course, taking advantage of this midterm review as an opportunity. We can see from here that the share of the highly skilled proportion of the labor has not changed. We also see that other components have not changed. Here's why it's a challenge. When you look at Malaysia in relation to the other countries, some of the comparators and competitors, you see actually that they have a much higher share of highly skilled labor force than the proportion that Malaysia currently has. So it's important, I think, that as we go forward, we really need to rethink about the high skilled agenda, as well as, of course, the medium skilled agenda. Here's a very important issue. I'm sure you have discussed this so many times, so I don't need maybe to spend too much time on it. But we all know that around half of jobs in Malaysia are at risk of being replaced or reshaped by automation. So this also calls for another rethink of the skills profile that you have in the economy. There are certain jobs, obviously, that we know that are at a much higher risk of being replaced by automation. There are certain jobs that are not at as much of a higher risk. When you look at the two ends of the spectrum, education and health basically face the least risk of being replaced by automation, whereas when you look at manufacturing and other sectors, they're actually at a higher risk for automation. So how do we rethink the skills agenda in light of this reality? And here's another important reality, and I'll come back to this toward the end of my talk. We all know that jobs are becoming less intensive in routine tasks and more intensive in analytical and socio-emotional tasks, of course, reflecting the reshaping of the skills landscape. So we can see here that the non-routine or cognitive analytical skills are basically in much higher demand. But a key question is, what are the education institutions in Malaysia training today? What are they producing? Are they responding to this shift? Maybe, maybe not. And then also, when you look at some of the key constraints that the firms face in Malaysia, there are two major realities. The first one is skills and labor, which basically sort of like which basically serve as the major binding constraints for the business environment in the country. It's not for all sectors, but we know very well that for automotive industry, electrical and electronics, as well as other sectors, this is actually a true binding constraint. So as we go through this midterm review, should we also rethink, I think, in terms of how the business environment could be fostered in order to overcome these binding constraints? And we also understand, of course, the reality that firms are facing an increasing challenge to identify employees with advanced cognitive, socio-emotional, as well as digital skills. It's not all the firms, but there are quite a number. So again, as we go through this midterm review, how do we address some of these gaps that the firms that are facing challenges can sort of like be reduced, and that the supply of these much needed skills basically gets enhanced in order, of course, to further strengthen the competitiveness and productivity for Malaysia. So where does this take us to? Malaysia obviously needs to upskill and reskill the current labor force while ensuring that the incoming pool of young talent is also well trained. So here we're calling for two things. We're calling for lifelong learning, but which really looks at two things: the early phase of learning, as well as, of course, the continuous learning, particularly in light of Dr. Norma's presentation on the fact that Malaysia is rapidly aging. We all know there's this reality where you have increasing underemployment, particularly of some of the graduates that are coming out of the tertiary institutions in the country. So as we go forward, what should we be thinking about? Or what does it take us to really have a match between what Malaysia needs versus what Malaysia is producing in terms of skills? So as I mentioned earlier, let's really think long and hard about a few realities that we really have to overcome. Number one is basically that we really need to rethink, I think, and focus at all levels, I think, of the education system. And with a very important fact in mind, 43% of children in the school system right now are basically experiencing what we call learning poverty, which basically means that they do not master the key competencies that basically make them thrive or to be productive in life. And related to that, obviously the fact that despite the many good plans that have been put up before us earlier, the international assessments for education, when you put Malaysia relative to other peers, Malaysia actually spends more, but in terms of returns on investment on education, it's actually not commensurate with those investments. So we also really need to rethink about that agenda as we move forward. We also need to think, of course, about teachers, particularly in terms of developing the much needed training, competence, and skills in order to educate the workforce. So I think a key message, hopefully, as we go through this midterm review, basically is invest early, particularly in cognitive and social and behavior skills that are very, very crucial for the later phase of the life cycle. There's quite a number of evidence and literature that has come up recently that clearly shows that if you invest early, the ability of your workforce to adapt to the changing market landscape is actually much better, because you basically would have been able to build better social-emotional skills as well as better cognitive skills at an early stage. In terms of this is basically the last, I think, slide that I will share with you. We really need to think about how do we match the supply as well as the demand for skills in Malaysia. Remember, we talked about the underemployment of the graduates that are here, but we also talked about the fact that there's automation and there are many other realities. So I'll just highlight a few policy considerations for you to think about this afternoon. Number one, obviously, is that it is important really to enhance the active labor market and demand dashboard that can basically really help to public agencies and industry to be able to better understand the alignment of what is being supplied versus what is being utilized or what is being demanded by markets. I think another important part really focuses on the regulatory reforms, really to enable women to better participate in the labor market. And number two, the older workers and youth to be able to find jobs. Remember, Dr. Normas gave us a very good statistics about the rapidly aging society. So just like Singapore did earlier, a few years earlier, rethinking of the labor market for the elderly and for the retirees is actually going to be a very, very important win for Malaysia in a few years' time. And then the last part that I'll just bring to your attention is basically the importance, basically to streamline the training programs. There are many. For Malaysia, it's not a shortage of training programs, particularly at the tertiary and vocational education stage, but it is more important to think of streamlining the training, focusing on quality of the graduates, and much more importantly, responding to the market demands and market needs. And then, of course, lastly, this is a no-brainer. We all know that apprenticeships tend actually to enhance the productivity of the employee during their full-time employment. So why not also rethink about scaling up apprenticeships programs going forward? So I'll leave it here for now, and I hope I'm still within my time, and really looking forward to this very, very fascinating session. But remember the earlier talk in the morning, we really need to rethink the face of innovation for Malaysia going forward, particularly knowing the fact that the return on investment from investing in human resources is actually going to be potentially going to be one of the long-term drivers of growth going forward for the country. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Mutasa. Certainly very thought-provoking, I think, data points that were shared. A lot of food for thought in terms of where our labor force is, in terms of whether they are mid-skilled or high-skilled, how automation is going to be replacing half the workforce, and of course the very stark and worrying statistic about 43% of our students are in the state of learning poverty. Yeah, and I think the question to ask from a planning point of view is, despite focusing on things like higher order thinking skills and cognitive skills over the last many years, why do we see this trend still continuing? So perhaps those may be questions that may come up later, but certainly very thought-provoking. Thank you for that. Now we move on to Dr. Rachel Gong to talk about digital inclusion and meaningful connectivity. Thank you.
Terima kasih, Puan Moderator. Salam sejahtera kepada tetamu kehormat, tuan-tuan dan puan-puan. A very good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Many thanks to the organizers for this opportunity to share some of the research on inclusion and meaningful connectivity as a policy enabler to achieving the goals of RMK12. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Khazanah Research Institute, we are a non-profit research institute whose objective is to undertake research and analysis on pressing national issues. Besides digital technologies, we also work on policy issues such as housing, labor, social protections, public health, agriculture, and climate adaptation. So we take the position that digital transformation is an all-of-society process and therefore needs to include public interest concerns and societal well-being, as well as economic development and growth. And this society-first policy framework recognizes that the challenges facing a digital-first society will not be solved just with the adoption of new technologies and more technical solutions, but with social solutions. And therefore, digital inclusion and good digital governance are key to national digital transformation. We've done work on a variety of topics that might be of interest to some of you here, but in the interest of time, I won't dig into them, and all our work is freely available on our website. Today, instead, let me try to take stock of Malaysia's push towards digital inclusion and advanced technologies. In the last 20 years or so, there have been a lot of digital and technology policies, from improving our infrastructure to growing the digital economy to advancing advanced technology in industry. And the most overarching blueprint in recent years was the My Digital Economy Blueprint released last year, which was called a critical enabler of RMK12. In fact, one of RMK12's goals is to boost digitalization and advanced technology by identifying 4 priority areas. These are advancing the digital economy, mainstreaming digitalization for inclusive development, accelerating research, development, commercialization, and innovation, and capitalizing on the potential of advanced technologies. In keeping with nation-building priorities of reducing inequality and creating equal opportunity, let me focus on what I think is foundational in growing the digital economy and advanced technology, namely the mainstreaming of digitalization for inclusive development. Without broadening our nation's digital skill base, and not just the user base here, so not just improving access, but improving the skills base, it will be a challenge for us to capitalize on the potential of advanced technology. In earlier KRI research, we used the term meaningful connectivity as defined by the UN's Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development. They defined the term as broadband adoption that is not just available, accessible, relevant, and affordable, but is also safe and secure, trusted, empowering users, and leading to positive impact. So this entails a shift in thinking about the digital divide in terms of access and affordability, which are of course still core issues that need to be addressed, and moving towards looking at the digital divide in terms of digital literacy and digital competencies. Closing these gaps are what will get us closer to our goal of growing the digital economy and taking advantage of the potential of advanced technologies. Now, according to JENDELA's Q3 2020 report, in terms of infrastructure, the initiative and our connectivity infrastructure is well on track. Malaysia is doing well with high levels of internet coverage, speed, and penetration. However, it is unclear if these statistics will transfer to the user experience, as we have heard a little bit of already in terms of the skills gap, and how that will affect meaningful connectivity. Since 2017, the Department of Statistics has done an annual ICT use and access by individual and household survey, which is quite a mouthful, but essentially they ask people, how much internet access do you have and what do you do when you're online? So let me share some of the findings from the 2021 survey. Good news first. 96% of households across the country have internet access. This translates into 97% of urban households and 89% of rural households having some form of internet access in the house. Also good news, the gender gap appears to be narrowing. Assuming a representative sample, 46% of internet users in 2020 were women. The age gap seems to be closing as well, but that may simply be an artifact of demographic shifting over time. Also good news, in 2021, 76% of rural households had access to a computer. Now this may seem low compared to the 96% with internet access, but it's likely that this is because the cheaper way of accessing the internet is via a mobile device and not through a computer. So the challenge where cost is concerned is really getting laptops into homes, especially for students. However, it is worth noting that despite near complete internet access at home, only 1 in 2 people surveyed say that they're comfortable making slides for presentations. So what we can conclude from this is internet access is necessary but not sufficient. And we will start seeing more of these digital literacy and competency challenges when we look more deeply into education, unemployment rates, digital fraud, and cybersecurity. Although the government has made some efforts and significant progress in distributing laptops to needy students and low-income households, in rural and remote areas, students still face challenges with online learning. Approximately 77% of students could not easily pivot to online classes during the pandemic due to limited digital resources at home, either in terms of lack of devices or low access to data plans. So this advantage is, of course, disproportionately borne by students from low-income households. While vacancies for digital jobs increased 3.5 times from 2020 to 2021, a statistic that we have from MDEC actually, as at October 2021, the Malaysian Department of Statistics estimates the youth unemployment rate to be almost 14%, over 3 times the national unemployment rate. There is, as has been mentioned, a skills mismatch between job seekers and employers, especially when it comes to digital jobs. And facing pressures to digitalize and automate, employers who are mostly small and medium-sized enterprises are likely to continue to face these ongoing challenges to find appropriate talent. When it comes to digital finance, BNM reports that from 2020 to 2021, digital payment transactions increased by over 30%. However, during this same period, the Polis Diraja Malaysia reports that fraud cases increased by 18%. Furthermore, a Netherlands-based cybersecurity company, Surfshark, found that Malaysia ranked globally for the number of data breaches in 2022. And with 4 major data breaches in both government and private sectors this year alone, national cybersecurity remains a pressing issue. So, if we are to tackle these issues and try to improve and mainstream digitalization, there are 3 key areas of enablers. There are 3 key enablers that we should focus our attention on. Firstly, making public sector systems and services, as well as digital finance, more accessible and trusted, and improving data governance will nudge the public into a digital-first mindset that can then facilitate growth and the adoption of more advanced technologies. I'd like to talk a little bit about public sector systems design. Building interoperable and sustainable digital ecosystems requires having reliable and secure hardware like servers for cloud computing, software that provides a friendly and accessible user experience, and most importantly, getting the process done in a way that is inclusive and agile and forward-looking. Affordability, interoperability, and user experience design are the key priorities here. One example is parking payment apps in Malaysia, where there are many different apps by many different providers, and each state has a different system. So this can frustrate a lot of people who are crossing borders and having to figure out how each different interface works and having to add funds to different apps all the time. So this is one way in which public sector design can really improve mainstreaming digitalization. Second, digital finance. With BNM's interoperable credit transfer framework in place, Malaysia has made great strides in cashless payments and e-wallets, but ultimately, fintech and financial inclusion need to go beyond payments to reach their full potential. Building trust and improving digital and financial literacy remains a challenge in this space. And third, data governance. Cybersecurity, as mentioned, will be a big part of data governance going forward. Given the 4 big data breaches that I mentioned, I expect the demand for cybersecurity and data governance experts to increase. So this is an area that's worth looking into as we move forward with the RMK12 midterm review. And this is necessary so that we can have databases that protect data and allow proper data sharing while maintaining data security. I think I'm running out of time here, so let me wrap up there and move any further discussion into the question and answer session. I hope that's been helpful, and I look forward to hearing your comments later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rachel, for again, another very enlightening sharing, I think, on the state of not just connectivity, but how you look at connectivity from it being meaningful, right, and to help mainstream digital inclusivity. Next, we'll move on to Professor Dr. Khoo Hui Ling to speak about modeling of mode shift behavior, a Bayesian network modeling approach. When I first saw the topic, I was wondering what it's about, but then I learned it's about public transport. So there you go. Over to you, Prof. Khoo.
Good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm very happy today to share with you some of my findings in my research work that we have done before the pandemic. It's about the modeling of mode shift behavior. So it is all right if you are not very familiar with the approach, the Bayesian network modeling. I'm not going to do the theoretical aspect of this, how do we do the work, but I just be more interested to share with you what does the model tell us about the findings of the questionnaire that we have done so far. Okay, so I will skip some of the slides due to the time constraint. The objective of our research, okay, has 2. One is that to investigate the mode shift contributing factors in Malaysia, and the second one is to examine the 2 soft impact of the factors that we consider. Number 1 is the incentive program. Number 2 is the traveler information system in encouraging mode shift. We know that mode shift is one of the travel demand management strategies that we use to shift the private vehicle user to public transport. So all the conventional methods that we have been using can be categorized into 2 big categories. One is the push factors, another one is the pull factors. Push factors are the factors that we implement, or the strategies that we implement in order to reduce the attractiveness of using private vehicles and trying to push these private vehicle users to use public transport. Instead, in the pull factors, we try to improve the attractiveness of our public transportation system in order to attract more ridership. So these are conventional travel demand management strategies that have been there for many decades. But recently, there are some new aspects in terms of the strategies and implementation. For example, the implementation of incentive program in several countries overseas has told us that there is a possibility that with the incentive program, we are able to influence drivers or the passengers' behavior in choosing which type of transportation mode. And secondly is that nowadays we know that we use all kinds of mobile apps, right? Like Google Maps, like Waze, and also from Prasarana we have Pulse apps that give us information about transportation system, not only private vehicles, not only what are the expected ETA time for us when we are driving, but we also can get all sorts of traffic and travel information through the public transport apps like Pulse. So these two aspects in terms of incentive program and the mobile apps are something new that we have not been looking into it. How will these two factors affect our traveler behavior? So this research combine both the conventional travel demand management strategies as well as the new aspects of behavior shifting factors. Then certainly we have also looked into the perception of the travelers, how they perceive the public transportation system, and how this perception and the peer influence will be able to help promote the mode shift behavior. Okay, so in our research, okay, these are the only two push factors that we have chosen are, number one is the fuel price. How does the fluctuation of fuel price, whether it's increased or reduced, would be able to help promote or help to change the travel behavior of the travelers. Secondly is the car parking charges. In any place, can be in a shopping mall, at the downtown, or maybe the car parking charges that usually is free for you at your offices, but now they start to do some charges and sometimes some sort of this. In terms of pull factors, we focus on how can we improve the attractiveness of public transportation system. And these include the hardware as well as the software of the public transport. When we talk about the hardware, we are talking about their coverage, their network coverage, their transfer, their network connectivity, convenient, park and ride services, accessibility, whether is there any station nearby or whether it is convenient for you to take the public transport, as well as the fare and the new, not so new, bus rapid transit system, which has been here in Sunway, in Bandar Sunway for quite some time. So how will this be able to, help to increase the attractiveness of the passengers to choose public transport? And in terms of perception, we look at the soft part and the behavior of the passengers themselves, where we look at their convenience, their perception of the carbon footprint reduction if they choose to use public transport, whether they feel less stressful when they choose to use a public transport, and what is the influence of the friends and colleagues' encouragement as well as their peers' influence. So these are the factors that we consider when we formulate or we construct our questionnaire. The questionnaire was done by about 460 drivers, okay, in Klang Valley. So those drivers are not public transport users. So we wanted to see how these factors would be able to affect their change in their behavior. Okay, so the mode shift incentive program, as I said, is something that is new, that has not been in Malaysia, but it has been applied elsewhere, like in Netherlands, in USA, and also in Singapore. These are some of the example incentive program where instead of, we try to give penalty to our passengers, right, for not using public transport, we try to give them some incentive so that we encourage them to choose to use public transport. So some of the typical examples that is given here, okay, maybe next time when we have time, I will go in more detail. Like in Netherlands is a speed mission project, USA is a Capri program, and Singapore in Sing program. These are all successful programs that implemented to promote certain shift of behavior, not only mode shift, but also departure, time shift, and others. Okay, so this is the hypothetical incentive program that we have formulated in our questionnaire. So these are, since they are hypothetical, so we take these examples from all kind of different incentive program that is available in Malaysia. For example, membership kind of incentive. Like for example, if we always go to some shopping mall, then they will let us subscribe their membership, and then we will be given the points, okay, and we can climb the levels and then claim more redemption and so on. So these are the ideas that we come up, we throw out. Since it is hypothetical, right, so we try to see which one will be effective and also which one will be influencing to our passengers. Okay, next one is the travel information system, where we look at public transportation apps and we look at different features. These are features that commonly appear in most of the public transport apps. So we quickly go into the model. Okay, so what does the model tell us about is that you can see at the right hand corner there is a triangle, okay, where we have the public transport fare, fuel price and the parking charge together, making a triangle, and this triangle directly go into the intention. So this model actually tells us that if we only consider public transport fare, we give a free ride, okay, we give a very low fare structure, okay, it is not attractive enough, okay, to pull more ridership. But if we can some sort of apply push factors together, like for example, we increase the fuel price or we increase the parking charges, then they will have the synergy effect to push more people to use public transport. And besides the fare, means that the travel cost is a sensitive factor to the passengers' choice when they want to choose which mode of transport. We can see that the hardcore of our public transport system under the network connectivity is also very important. So this include, okay, the park and ride, and also the perception of the convenience, as well as the perceived reliability of the service by our passenger. And the two factors that I mentioned earlier is about the incentive and also the travel information apps. We can see that in here, it gives only the indirect impact. It does not directly push our passengers to use public transport, but indirectly, with certain terms and conditions or under certain scenario, it would be able to help, okay, improve the public transport ridership. But of course, due to the time constraint, okay, maybe I do not have too much time on that. Okay, maybe later I can take some question on that. So the results implications from here is that travel cost is one crucial factor, okay, but we cannot only have one factor. That means we have to have the synergy effect together with the push factor. Incentive program can work only when the fundamental of the public transport is good, like the accessibility and others, right? So incentive program could encourage more shift to public transport, especially for those who stay nearby to public transport network. And travel information is regarded as one of the components of an integrated public transport system that plays a role in encouraging more shift. So both factors are indirect. So I think that's all for my sharing today. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Khoo, for the very interesting presentation. I think from a research point of view, it probably validates a lot of the things that we would have, guessed. But I think the research definitely validates it and provides us guidance on how we can help to get more people to use public transport, right? Okay, so last but not least, we have Dato Dr. Anis, who is an expert when it comes to governance, integrity and development. And so over to you, Dato Anis, to talk about upholding strong governance. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sumitra. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good afternoon to all. You all have listened to 22 people. I'm the 23rd. I don't know whether you have the energy to listen to another presentation. It's too much. We've been talking and talking. I think it's time for us to work. So let us remind ourselves. I've been given this topic, upholding strong governance. How do I make this thing move? Gee, I don't even know this. Okay. Let us recap. The objective of this kickoff meeting is to make it as a platform for bringing the stakeholders and experts together to discuss on some ideas. And of course, as a platform for us to relook and, when you do, to tweak the midterm review, you need to look at the policy formulated many, many years ago. I was involved with the chapter on governance when I was still at JICC. And of course, at the time when we wrote this, we didn't really understand that the COVID was coming and many things came after that. So I think it's time to reflect. So, and I was told the deliverables would be in the context of governance is to strengthen governance. So I have 5 points. Allow me to share with you. The first point is about value-driven governance. Second, about monitoring governance. Third, about foresight and anticipatory governance. Fourth, SDGs and governance. And the fifth, impact of COVID-19 pandemic and governance. Let me straight to the key concern. Number one, when we talk about governance, of course, the danger is that, both public and private sector success and progress are often gauged through quantifiable economic measurement. So when you do that, the assumption is that the metrics will overlook the crucial humanistic part of the whole thing. So where is that human element that is essential in governance? Sometimes becomes too systematic and we miss out. So therefore, the solution is understanding the concept of value-driven governance. So the new title that I'm giving myself for this presentation, sorry to the organizer, is upholding value-driven governance. What I'm going to be discussing is around that value-driven governance, because I think that's key. Now, if we were to re-examine the term governance, you all know what governance means. I remember there was a time that when I talked about governance, when I was working with UNDP and we were pushing for governance, somebody told me, why? Isn't our government good enough? I said, no, governance and government are two different things. But now I'm glad that people know what governance is all about. The private sector talk about corporate governance, and we know what good governance is. According to UNDP, I've had the opportunity to work in this organization. Of course, World Bank started this way back in 1992, but UNDP gave this measurement. The 8 factors is that number one, there must be participation. Whose participation? There's a human being that will participate in whatever we do. Rule of law. Who respects the rule of law? Is a human being. Transparency. What transparency? Are we just talking about document transparency? The person, the people involved in the process of governance must be transparent. Responsiveness is the person again. Consensus-oriented. People again. Equity and inclusiveness, effectiveness, efficiency, and accountability. Ultimately, in the Malay, there is a saying, bertanggung jawab. Very beautiful word, You tanggung, you're going to jawab. So these are key fundamental things that when we plan, you must make sure that all these are part of your planning, so that it doesn't move out from talking governance, the system, but it's actually the human being. So if you go after, I remember there was an audit meeting that we were discussing about a problem, and yet somebody said, oh, don't worry about that problem because we have transferred that guy. I said, yeah, you transfer the guy. You think you solve the problem? You transfer the problem. He moved to a new department and you start to do something wrong somewhere else. So that human being must be dealt with. Going back to the old history, the National Integrity Plan, if you look at the basic model of integrity plan, is again centered to the people. The element within it, whether it's administration, the politics, the business, and the backbone of this total model that we design is the family institution. Family, civil society, the community. And what propelled this particular turtle to be on the right path is the religious institution and the social culture. So again, governance, integrity is very much along the people side. During my sabbatical at Malaysia Institute of Integrity, between 2005 and 2008, I came out with this first book. This is the first book on political integrity. Why? Because I thought political integrity is essential because we have so many problems with political governance. And the chapters that we discuss are all, if you look at it, are all targeting the leaders. So governance and leaders are key. So if we relook back at RMK 12, certainly we need to emphasize on the need of making sure that we have the right leaders with the right kind of integrity. My second tour, I went back to Integrity Institute as a president, and I decided that we have to focus to the young. So we developed a module for kindergarten. And this module basically is simple, creating stories, but stories with values. So back to the value-driven governance. How do you teach 5-year-old kid about governance? You're going to don't tell these kids, children, governance means this uncle, you have something wrong with you. So we have to really tell them through puppet storytelling. And you know what happened when we did the pre and post test of this particular exercise? Parents came to the school and asked the teacher, what were you teaching my kid? Why? Because the kid went home, when the mother did something wrong, said, Ma, you have no integrity. Serve the mother right. So we even have this little mascot that became so popular. That particular year, I get so many invitations, not for me to go to the kindergarten, but for the mascot. So now I get to number 2, monitoring governance. I'm going to go very fast. I have another 3 minutes, but I hope I have injury time. Now it's football time. Monitoring governance, we have to monitor. We know the Corruption Perception Index. I'm comparing Malaysia with Indonesia and South Korea. At one time, South Korea and Malaysia, we were at the same place. But South Korea went up and remained above us while we are on this roller coaster ride. But look at Indonesia, far down there, but they are catching up and coming up very high up. So how do we understand this if we don't understand the detail behind the sub-indices of how CPI has been managed? So I urge that while we are doing the midterm review, we have to look at all this because there are other agencies that needs to help. Ease of doing business is not the GICC or the MACC. It involves other people. So we have to make sure that cross-cutting agencies must play their role in ensuring that all the sub-indices improve. Well, when we were doing the plan, of course, we went to the data. The base is basically was empirical evidence. And we know that the area prone to corruption is very much in public procurement. As OECD stated, that's the easiest way for people to divert public fund for personal gain. So, the National Anti-Corruption Plan, which has clear target from political governance to public sector focus on public procurement to judiciary to an enforcement agency and to business environment. These are focus areas which you cannot achieve if you look at it from one particular angle. You need to have it cut across of many other sources. I developed this Malaysian governance indicators because we want to make sure that the plan doesn't remain a plan, but there are clear indicators which explain how we achieve the plan. I'm just going to go very fast. This example of public sector administration, we have clear measures of how we see the improvement. So in looking back at the chapter on governance, I think we have to revisit some of these things because things have changed post-COVID, right? And in fact, important for this type of module training to be done and new leaders have to be trained. We cannot have a plan, even the RMK 12, if we don't have the right leaders on the ground at different levels to implement some of this plan. I got 30 seconds. I wrote this little piece after we launched the National Anti-Corruption Plan because I think it's important, ultimately what we want is to build a space that we can call trust. You can read about it later. I still have 2 more to go. Foresight, let me just quickly say foresight is important. If you have not done, you need to do a foresight. We did the foresight when we did the National Anti-Corruption Plan. We know what's coming. I know we were talking just now about digital inclusion and all this stuff, but forget about big data. The small data in front of you, people are not using it. People say, oh, we have to think outside the box. Forget about thinking outside the box. You have not think inside the box. So these are some of the challenges I think we need to look at. With coming blockchain, technology, AI, are we ready to meet? Anybody from MACC in the house? Nobody wants to claim. I ask the question, is MACC ready to go and catch the guy who does corruption using artificial intelligence, and do we have the technology to catch people if they are using all this technology? We have to do something about this. Things are changing, so we cannot simply work the way we were. So the foresight gave us all the different options of what are the possibilities. Finally, SDG governance, I think Prof. Mazlin showed this just now, but my concern is this: you cannot try to isolate and address each SDG by itself. There's definitely connection between governance, walaupun ada kat number 16, is actually cut across. You need to have governance in poverty, in every one of those things. So in planning, if you don't have the governance part in all that, you will not going to be able to achieve much. As it is, if we have done well with poverty, I'm wondering how come that is green, but hunger is still in red. Something is wrong somewhere. We have addressed poverty, that means people should not be in hunger. So I think we got to rethink the whole thing again. Last, I know I have to wrap up. This is commercial break time. I'm just doing a bit of promotion. This is the book that I wrote recently with Prof. Ramanambong. But it's an important book. If you haven't got it, go and buy it. Because here I have the answer to a lot of things that we are discussing today, is the impact of COVID-19 pandemic and governance in Malaysia. You can read a bit about what the other people, the blurb, has written about that. And with that, sorry for taking a bit of time, but thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Anis. Certainly a lot to think about. You know, when I listen to all the four panelists today, I think one thing is apparent. While all these four issues are probably, you know, well talked about, and if you go out to the lobby out there and ask people, everybody will give you an answer. Everybody has a solution, right? It's very well debated. But I think what is also apparent is there is no silver bullet. So while we have lovely plans and blueprints, and you know, execution has started, but these are not siloed problems, right? So when you talk about connectivity, there are interdependencies with other things we need to think about, right? So Dr. Rachel spoke about how you look at it in relation to unemployment or skills, right? So connectivity with skills. When we listened to Dr. Mutasa, it was the same. When you think about skills, there are other things you need to think about, right? So automation, it's a lot of interconnectivity with other things that are happening. I think same with public transport. We spoke about it's not just the incentives, it's not just the push, but it's also the pull, and it's various other factors, right? Same with governance. I mean, we talked about how you need to look at it holistically. It's not, you know, you cannot like just sort of pin down and say, I'll address only skills or only corruption and then everything else will be fine. It doesn't work that way. So certainly a lot of things to think about from a planning point of view. We do have some time for questions, so I'm going to open it up now. If there are anyone who has a question, please raise your hand and we'll bring the mic to you. Surely there must be questions, because these were all very interesting topics. As I said, you know, everybody has an opinion about education, everybody has an opinion about governance, about public transport. I'm sure there are people in this room who have questions about these topics. Oh, we have some that's online as well. Perhaps we can start with that. So for public transport, how to encourage higher ridership as Malaysia has tropical weather, that's a good one. Increase comfort for commuters, so they will start to shift to public transport. Prof, you want to take that?
Okay, thank you. For this, okay, tropical weather. I think weather is one thing that we cannot change because we are in Malaysia, right? So I think what we need to do is to adapt to the situation and try to make it more comfortable, because sometimes we can provide like shaded shades, we can plant some more trees to provide the shaded areas, or maybe we can put the cover. Sometimes we can also do like, for example, the underground and others. But of course, that would be also have to consider the cost as well, the construction cost. So in this case, I think whether we cannot do anything on it, but we are trying to look optimistically to look at some other factors that we can do more actively to help to shift the public transport ridership.
Thank you.
Okay.
Certainly, can't control the weather, but perhaps maybe in addition to what Prof was saying, is just top of my head is perhaps we need to take a more user-centered design, right? So, and sometimes we know this as we're walking through from one station to another station, whether it's a LRT or monorail or a bus, you find there are gaps in the shaded areas, right? So I think if you take a user-centered approach to addressing some of these issues, I think then we can certainly address, things like weather. All right, next question. I suppose this relates to Dr. Rachel. How do you evaluate Malaysia's last mile connectivity performance?
Yeah, thanks for this question. I think this has been an issue that people have been talking about because usually what we see in the official reports are relatively high speeds, which are measured basically, I'm not trying to pick on anybody here, but they're measured basically by testing the signal at towers and infrastructure towers. So the signal is usually great at that point. But by the time it gets out to the user, whether they're in offices in cities or they're out in rural areas, connectivity has definitely fallen off, signal has fallen off. So, there's very much, there's a lot of value to be found in shifting away from measuring at the base of the telco tower and doing what MCMC is actually, I believe, developing. There's a proposal for them to be developing crowdsourced application measurements of speeds, where they're starting to move away from those towers and starting to look at services like Ookla that report what users report and getting a more accurate sense. So I had a slide earlier that basically showed even now JENDELA is reporting the connectivity download speeds at around 50 megabits per second, and Ookla reports it at about 30 megabits per second. And I was in Sarawak actually a couple of months ago out in some of the longhouses, and it's well below that. So I think, absolutely last mile connectivity is something that we have to explore and look at various different options. There are many different ways of doing different things depending on the area and the kepadatan penduduk, the population density, and things like that need to be taken into account.
Thank you, Dr. Rachel. Any other questions? While you think of your question, there is another one. Okay, so otherwise I'll not hijack the questions from the audience. So let me read it. We want people to go online to improve income and gain skills. Given rising scams now, how do you improve cybersecurity efforts to gain people's trust to go online? Would you like to take it, Dr. Rachel? Yeah? And anybody else who would like to chime in after that? Thanks.
Sure, I can, I can take a shot at this. I think absolutely mainstreaming public literacy around scams, around cybersecurity, just raising awareness around things like privacy and how to evaluate information when you get an anonymous call or an offer that seems too good to be true is something that needs to be done. And I think the challenge right now is that a lot of it is happening around social media, which is already accessed by people who are already highly digitally literate. So there needs to, I think, be a shift in the public communications efforts to move into things like radio and television, because that's the group that you're trying to inform and educate around how to protect themselves. It needs to move out into the communities, into masjids, into really just local community efforts. And that's where we're going to get, I think, a little bit more traction on people being able to be aware of what the risks are online.
Thank you. So in fact, in one of my previous roles, we initiated a program to build cyber safety and literacy in schools. But I think back then, because digitalization was not as pervasive as what we have seen after COVID, we kind of like left out the senior citizens. And as you say, the local communities, right? The mosques and the older generation. But today, if you read a lot about the online scams and so on, or even the phone scams and whatever not, it's the seniors who are getting impacted. So I think this literacy must be more inclusive to include the other segments of community as well. Anybody else wishes to add? Dato, would you like to add to that? Yeah, okay. All right, so got another question here. When it comes to governance, this is for you, Dato, certainly. What do you think of the current check and balance system in Malaysia? If not sufficient, where are the areas of improvement? And if I can just add to that question, right, because I was going to ask the same thing. Like, we've been talking about anti-corruption and integrity for years now. And you know, they say if you do something and if you keep doing something in the same way and you don't get different results, right? You still keep getting the same results, then the question is, what do you need to change? And I think it kind of relates to this as well. What do we need to change to get the kind of results that we need? Over to you.
Let me answer that question first and answer your question. For that question, whoever sent that, not enough, not sufficient. We have to do more. We have to be serious, I think. We cannot talk about governance and then we violated everything else. I think this have to be clear. There's a certain principles that we have to adhere. The rules are not there for us to tweak and change. The rules are there as a guideline, as a principles for us to follow. So those things are important. We cannot just say that, we follow the rules when we want to, but when the different type of games you choose to do. It's like if you play rugby, rugby is a game, you play soccer. Soccer is a game that you kick the ball now with World Cup, right? You cannot suddenly say, I want to play soccer, but I want to use the rugby rules and start touching the ball and running with the ball. I think this is important. But to your question, Dr. Sumitra, I think we need to go back to the basic thing is, in order to address a lot of all this problem, we have to go back to education. And education has to start from young, and that's why I was showing what I was trying to do. Despite that we have that module, I know that it didn't get rolled out. It's unfortunate. We pilot tested, they said this is good, but nobody takes it seriously because it's additional work to some people. So, are we serious about it? Additional work? You want to see people living in this kind of problem with corruption everywhere? We have to start them young. We need to really, because the value, you see, I give you an example. If I ask you, how much is the cost of the mineral bottle, everybody know the price. If I were to ask you the value, you will only know the value when your house doesn't have any water running. That value is what we want to make sure that everybody will have it. And that takes time. It's the whole, you're doing social re-engineering. It's a culture thing. We have been conditioned for a very long time to believe and understand certain ways. So to change, it takes time. So you cannot have a policy, RMK 12, to do this, and we expect by tomorrow we will achieve it. No. There are part of the plan. It's a long-term thing. But the long-term, there are also those low-hanging fruits that we need to tackle. But even that, sometimes we say we want to do, but we don't. I don't mince my word, and I'm saying this, and Dato' Zunika, she knows the work that I've been doing, and I've been saying, and I speak the way I speak, because I care. I think for the future generation in this country, we all have to care. We have to do the best that we could to ensure that this governance thing that we thought is not just lip service, but it is something that we know if we don't do, we are going to go the route of Zimbabwe, Somalia, and all those countries who are having problem with governance.
Thank you, Dato'. I think certainly, something that we need to take seriously, right? And governance is, of course, extremely important. But all the topics that we touched on today are foundational. They are critical enablers, right? Having the right skills, having the right infrastructure and access, and showing people how to use it productively, safely, effectively, and helping people to get access, whether it is online or even physically via, from one point to another. And I'm sure this conversation will continue, and feel free to reach out to any of the speakers today. I'm sure they'd be willing to answer any kinds of questions or even requests for more ideas. I think we all have, we do have one more now. I think we're time's up though. Right, we're time's up, and but we can certainly take it once we get off the stage. And let's keep the conversation going. Let's continue to provide inputs to EPU and to the rest of our colleagues so that we can come out with a stronger, better and more effective rest of RMK12. Thank you very much again to the organizers, and back to you, Tuan Pengacara. Thank you.
Thank you, Yang Berusaha Dr. Sumitra Nair and all panelists for the delightful session. We invite all of you to return to your seats.